electric media appear to bring us into a state of harmony with the skepticism and analytic qualities of writing. However, electronic media, like television, are not reality or real, but mimetic. They mimic the human life world and present information to us in a gestalt, simultaneous, nonlinear, non-rational, and non-discursive way. In this sense, they're a throwback, an atavism, a return to the intensely engaged, subjective, and emotional mindset of mimetic orality, a secondary orality. The ubiquity of electric media makes the argument for the rise of a secondary cultural orality all the more compelling. The average American household contains, as of 1999, so inflate these numbers just a bit if you will, 3 televisions, 1.8 VCRs, 3.1 radios, 2.1 CD players, 1.4 video games, and 1 computer. The average American child is engaging more and more media at a much earlier age, which serve to structure his or her thought in a powerfully presentational way. 83% of American children under the age of 6 use screen media, that is to say television, computer, or video games, on a daily basis, on average for 2 hours a day. 36% of children under the age of 6 watch television in their own room. 56% of boys and 36% of girls between the ages of 4 and 6 play video games on a regular basis, on average for more than an hour each day. And we've probably all heard something about the release last month of the Kaiser Family Foundation's report, Generation M2, Media in the Lives of 8 to 18-year-olds, which indicates that American teenagers are exposed to 10 hours and 45 minutes of mediated reality each day. This is not a nostalgic, alarmist sort of a thing about, oh, too much sex on television, too much violence in video games. No, this is an indication of how we're shifting our thought processes from propositional structures to presentational structures, and that's far more dangerous. Meanwhile, standardized test scores have fallen continuously since the 1960s, even in spite of a process of recentering the data. I guess they didn't like what I was saying. In 1966, the average verbal score for all students was, that always happens when I start knocking on television. People just walk away. In 1966, the average verbal score for all students was 543, and the combined verbal and math score for all students was 1059, both uncorrected by recentering. SATs scores have fallen continuously from 980 in 1963 to 900 in 1990. They hit a low of 499 for verbal that year. And this phenomenon runs consistently throughout American culture. It is not restricted by geography or social class, by race or gender. And it is as true of students in the very top schools of our country as it is of those entering more local, less prestigious schools. Fewer than half of all American adults now read literature. The number and proportion of Americans who have read any book has declined even more precipitously. This decline in reading correlates strongly with a parallel decline in civic engagement. Coupled with electric culture's emphasis on immanence, this has all taken a toll on Americans' views of their fundamental rights. A 2007 study by the Knight Foundation showed that 73% of U.S. high school students say they really didn't know how they feel about the First Amendment, or that they take it for granted. And they were far more likely than older Americans to support censorship. And a 2006 study by the McCormick Tribune Foundation found that 22% of Americans could name all 5 Simpson family members. I'll bet you can. But only 1/10% could name all 5 freedoms enshrined in the First Amendment. But an electric media-saturated culture is not, as I have tried to indicate, in and of itself the problem. It is rather the specter, as a result of all I've just mentioned, of a diminished capacity for rational propositional thought that's the real danger. It's the susceptibility that we see all around us to gossip, innuendo, insinuation, and other forms of what Princeton Emeritus Professor of Philosophy Harry G. Frankfurt calls bullshit. That's the real danger. That is what ought to concern us. The recent studies into neural activity that I mentioned earlier, directly related to reading and viewing visual media, suggests strongly that propositional structures of thought are mapped early on in life by and through the activities of reading, writing, and speaking with others. The more time dedicated to non-propositional media of various sorts, the less time there is either to train a child in the habits of literacy or to train his or her synapses to fire across the necessary neural pathways to make that child literate, both in the behavioral sense and in the intellectual one. We have, through the monopoly of space-biased knowledge created by the dominance of electric media in the last century and a half, created an empire of capitalism, of consumption, of control, and of the capitulation of conscience. Our electric media have made it not only possible, but imperative that the masses should live lives of comfort and leisure, that the future of business lay in its ability to manufacture customers as well as products. Those are the words of the late 19th, early 20th century Boston marketer Edward Fallon. A whole new epistemology is created, one which says simply that what is worth knowing is that which relates directly to me and the satisfaction of needs artificially created for me by an information industry directly and intimately connected to the mechanisms of production and distribution. What is important to know in our world today, in other words, is nothing more than what one needs to be a productive worker and a canny, efficient consumer of mass-produced commodities. Is this what accounts for relevance in the postmodern mind? Is it nothing more than, in a culture of constant change and uncertainty, the predictable, dependable familiarity of consumption? Has the comfortable imminence of "that's just the way it is" prosperity replaced the uncomfortable transcendence of "I dream things that never were and ask why not" idealism? Is this what has become of not only our imagination, but our moral imagination? Can it truly be that our only purpose in life is to stay alive in order to participate willfully and play our role with all the false enthusiasm we can muster in the unending cycle of highly efficient production, artificially created demand, and profligate consumption? We surrender our individualism by failing or refusing to ask certain questions. Questions of God, of transcendence, of timeless eternal truth. All these things sound quaint and naive to the postmodern ear. Those who ask these questions appear silly, superstitious, credulous, and sometimes even reactionary. It is, I suggest, the occupational hazard of the harvester of transcendent truths laboring in the vineyards of immanent experience. One might be inclined to advise any who fit that description just to get used to it, because that's just the way it is. And you'll never change it, because you're just one person, and you don't have the power. So go about your business. And I leave you tonight with these two questions. Can this possibly be what human